There's a question every matchmaker, every coach, and honestly, every fan has to answer with a straight face at some point. What do you do with a madman like Jiří Procházka? Because you can't treat him like a normal contender. Normal contenders defend themselves with tight shells and safer matchups. Jiří defends himself with spinning elbows, philosophical rambling, and the vague promise that he might die in there and be fine with it. In a sport that keeps getting more managed, more data-driven, more safe, he walks in like a glitch from an older version of MMA that somehow survived the patch. He's been a champion. He vacated his belt like a gentleman because his shoulder exploded. He fought his way back, got knocked out by Alex Pereira chasing it, rebuilt himself, got a second shot, and got head kicked into the void. You would think that's where the story ends. Instead, he comes back again, knocks out Jamal Hill, nukes Rountree, and somehow looks more beloved than ever. So for the UFC, the question isn't just, is Jiří a title contender? The question is, what do you do when your division's most beloved psychopath refuses to follow the script? I'm Reggie Cross. This is Behind the Lines. Roll it. If you want the cleanest snapshot of who Jiří Procházka is right now, you don't start with the belt. You start with a man walking into UFC 320 in Vegas, carrying one very loud, unsolved problem behind him. Alex Pereira. 2 title fights with Poatan, 2 brutal knockouts, 2 reminders that there's a level of power out there that doesn't care how brave you are. And yet, coming into UFC 320, Jiří is not some broken toy. He's already rebuilt once. He took a beating to his legs from Alexander Rakic at UFC 300 and came back to stop him with a second-round TKO. He walked down Jamal Hill at UFC 311 and put him away in round 3. So technically, the record says, Pereira beat him, he bounced back. Pereira beat him again, he bounced back again. And now he's here, across from Rountree Jr. Khalil is not a tune-up fight. He's a small, personal crisis with Muay Thai tattoos, low kicks that sound like somebody chopping down a telephone pole, a left hand that erases plans, a recent title shot against Pereira where he pushed Poatan deep into the 4th round before getting finished, and later a dominant win over Jamal Hill in Baku. This is not the kind of guy you feed to a delicate former champion. If Jiří wanted to play it safe, this is where he'd finally become veteran-savvy Jiří. High guard, conservative pressure, point fight when you have to, make boring look like maturity. Instead, he does what he always does. He trusts himself. The fight is tense, messy. You can feel the danger in every exchange. Then round 3 hits, and it turns. Jiří starts walking Rountree down with that strange, bouncing pressure. He eats counters. He doesn't flinch. The rhythms get weirder. The angles get nastier. And then he detonates. Combination, pressure, relentless follow-up, and Rountree drops. 3rd round comeback KO. Fight of the night and performance of the night in one go. The message was simple. You can beat Jiří. You can knock him cold, but you will never domesticate him. And that's the core tension of his whole career. You don't just appear in the UFC like this. You don't wake up one day in Brno, throw your hair in a top knot, talk about Bushido, and stumble into being everyone's favorite fever dream. Jiří was forged in places where MMA still felt like chaos with ring girls. RIZIN, Japan. Out there, he wasn't just another contender. He was the strange, foreign main character in a manga that got turned into a combat sport. Hands low, wild feints with his whole body. Reckless entries that made coaches age a decade per fight. He wasn't building a resume, he was building a myth. Spinning elbows, flying knees, getting rocked and coming back like the universe hit undo. The style said, I am not here to win comfortably. I am here to see how far this can go. When the UFC signed him, they didn't just get a light heavyweight prospect, they signed a problem. Because with a guy like this, it's never as simple as if he wins, he's in the title mix. If he loses, he's out. If he wins, the division gets more dangerous. If he loses, the fan base likes him more. That's not how normal matchmaking math works. Fast forward to the night Chaos got a crown. UFC 275. Jiří Procházka versus Glover Teixeira. On one side, Glover, beloved veteran, granite chin, ridiculously durable, finally making his late career run. On the other, Jiří, fringe cult figure, RIZIN highlight reel, the guy hardcore fans were screaming about while casuals asked how to pronounce his last name. What followed was one of the wildest title fights this sport has ever seen. Glover drags him into deep water, cracks him, gets top position. Jiří scrambles out of bad spots, rallies, hurts Glover back. Both make awful choices, then heroic recoveries, sometimes in the same 30 seconds. By round 5, any normal fighter is thinking, okay, maybe don't take any stupid risks. Maybe bank the round and see what the judges say. Jiří goes the other way. He finds Glover's neck in a scramble, jumps on a rear naked choke with less than 30 seconds left, no hooks, no perfect position, just bite and squeeze, and taps out one of the toughest men on the roster. He doesn't just win a belt, he wins it in a way that feels like a hallucination. That's when people inside the UFC really had to ask themselves, if this guy is champion, how do we keep him alive? Because you can't tell Jiří to fight smarter without killing everything that makes him special. He is what he is, a high-variance main event where you might get a legendary finish or a legendary disaster. And just when the promotion is trying to figure that out, the universe steps in. His shoulder goes bad. Worst injury we've ever seen, kind of bad. And Jiří does something almost nobody does in this era. He vacates the belt. No public leverage play, no interim champ hostage situation, just, I can't defend it, let them move on. That's not modern champion behavior, that's samurai logic, and it's going to echo through everything that comes after. Now we get to the part of the movie where the other hero walks in. If Jiří is the madman, Alex Pereira is the executioner. Calm, still, stone-faced walk, left hook written in ancient script. When Jiří finally comes back from the shoulder nightmare, the belt he vacated is still floating. They book UFC 295 in Madison Square Garden, Pereira versus Procházka for the vacant light heavyweight title. Jiří, returning champion in everything but paperwork. Poatan, former middleweight king who just knocked out Israel Adesanya, now hunting a second division. The fight is tense and ugly in the way only high-risk fights can be. Jiří does what Jiří does. Awkward blitzes, weird footwork, willingness to stand in places your coach warned you about. Pereira does what Pereira does. Stands tall, reads the opponent, waits. In round 2, Jiří leans into the wrong pocket, catches a left, eats elbows on the ground, and the ref jumps in. A lot of people argued the stoppage. On replays, you can see moments where he's trying to survive, but the record is clear. Pereira becomes the new light heavyweight champion by stopping Jiří Procházka for the vacant belt. Now, this is where a lot of stories would cut straight to the rematch, but reality gave Jiří a different chapter first. UFC 300, Alexander Rakic. Rakic batters his legs in round 1. Chop, chop, chop. Jiří's stance looks like it's falling apart. Then round 2 hits. Jiří does the only thing that makes sense in his world. He walks forward anyway, eats risk, finds openings, and pours on pressure until Rakic breaks. Second round TKO. Performance of the night. Statement win on one of the biggest cards of all time. He fights his way right back into the conversation, and the UFC does something a little insane. They give him a rematch with Poatan on short notice at UFC 303. Pereira versus Procházka 2. If the first fight was messy, the second is a clean execution. Right at the end of round 1, Pereira drops him with that left hand. Jiri gets saved by the horn. 5 seconds into round 2, Poatan flicks up a left head kick that wraps around Jiri's guard and detonates. Follow-up punches, fight over. Lights out. 2 title fights with Alex Pereira, one by elbows, one by head kick and punches, 0-2 on paper, 0-2 in the body. And for most guys, that's the end of the story. You ran face first into the final boss twice and got killed both times. But this is where the Jiri arc starts to get weird, because instead of quietly fading, he reloads. After UFC 303, everyone could see the facts. Pereira can hurt Jiri badly. Twice. Jiri's style leaves him open to exactly that kind of precision. That's the kind of reality check that sends a lot of careers into the slow fade bracket. Take safer matchups, pad the record, pretend the title shot window isn't closing. Jiri doesn't do that. We already talked about Rakic at UFC 300. Legs mangled, comeback TKO. That's a turning point. Then they give him Jamal Hill at UFC 311. The man who technically took the belt he vacated. The guy who beat Glover for the strap in his absence, then got knocked out by Pereira at UFC 300. This isn't some gentle reintroduction. Hill hits hard. Hill is big. Hill is dangerous. Jiri walks him down, drags him into exchanges he doesn't want, and stops him in round 3. Another finish. Another performance of the night. One fight later, it's Khalil Rountree at UFC 320. The guy who went 4 rounds deep with Pereira in a title fight and later beat Hill in Baku. Neither of those matchups are, let's hide this guy and hope people forget those Poatan KOs. They're basically the matchmakers saying, if you're still here, prove it against real threats. And every time, Jiri says, okay, I'll meet you where it's worse. That's not how a cautious late career rebuild looks. That's how a madman behaves. You want to know why Jiri can get knocked out in 2 title fights, come back, and still be sitting at the top of the fan favorite list? Look at the difference in how people talk about him versus most fighters who lose big. Most contenders take 2 L's to the champ, and the timeline spits out, washed, exposed. He was never that good. With Jiri, you see, warrior. Run it back someday. I'll watch him fight anybody. That's not just vibes. That's a reaction to how he engages with the sport. There's a quiet fan code. Don't cheat us on effort. If you're in a main event and you coast, people feel it. Jiri doesn't coast. He might make terrible life choices mid-exchange, but he does not cheat effort. Don't cheat us on risk. After Pereira, Jiri didn't ask for a middle-of-the-pack guy and a safe decision. He fought Rakic, Hill, Rountree, big punchers, real risk. Don't cheat us on authenticity. The samurai code thing would be corny if it was just content, but this is the guy who shaved his head to match a fan going through chemo, donated money to help, brought her up at events, and genuinely lives like someone who thinks the fight is part spiritual test, part therapy session. You don't have to agree with his philosophy. You don't have to think it's smart, but there's a consistency to it that fans respect. He doesn't just talk about warrior spirit in the countdown and then point fight on Saturday. He actually lives it, for better or worse. And in a sport where a lot of personalities feel focus grouped and risk managed, that sticks out. Here's where Jiri's story gets even stranger. Because it's one thing to chase a belt that's sitting still. It's another thing to chase a belt that might be halfway out the door. Alex Pereira isn't just defending at light heavyweight and quietly stacking title defenses. He's talking openly about heavyweight now. Not just maybe one day. He's throwing out the idea of going up, having a big fight at heavyweight, maybe even testing himself against the monsters up there. He's already done the double champ thing. Now he's looking at a different kind of history book. So from Jiri's point of view, this is the situation. The man who knocked you out twice holds the belt you once vacated and might decide he's got bigger fish to fry in another division. That's not a normal chase. That's trying to hit a moving target. Because if Pereira really leans into heavyweight adventures, 205 becomes this weird limbo. Is the champ still really a light heavyweight? Or is he just visiting until something bigger pulls him away? And this is where Jiri's existence starts to bend the whole division around him. If Pereira stays put at 205 for a while, the path is brutally simple. You line up Jiri with the other sharks, Ankalaev, Ulberg, whoever you think is next. You make him prove one more time that he's the man you cannot deny. And then the question becomes almost philosophical. At what point does a guy's body of work force you to ignore the 0-2 on his record and give him another crack at the same monster? Because if he keeps knocking out contenders, the matchmaker math and the fan math are going to split. On a spreadsheet, it's easy to say, we can't book Pereira versus Jiri 3. He's already down 2. But in people's hearts, it becomes, I don't care what the numbers say. This man earned the right to roll the dice again. That's the tension. If Pereira really leaves light heavyweight, goes all in on heavyweight glory, maybe vacates the belt, then things get even more interesting. Suddenly, you're not selling, can Jiri finally solve Pereira? You're selling, the king is gone, who takes the throne? And in that world, Jiri isn't a tragic figure chasing a ghost he can't beat. He's one half of a new story. Jiri versus Ankalaev for the vacant title. Or Jiri versus Ulberg. Or some wild bracket where crazy fights control for the right to call themselves the next champion in a post-Pereira era. The shadow of those knockouts doesn't disappear, but it stops being a lock on the door. It turns into backstory. Yeah, he couldn't get past Poatan, but once Poatan moved on, look what he did with the division. That's a very different legacy than guy who almost had it. And then there's the messy middle. Pereira half in, half out, talking about heavyweight, flirting with super fights, still technically the light heavyweight champ, but with one eye always looking up a division. In that universe, Jiri's situation is the most uncomfortable, too good to ignore, too dangerous to feed to every rising contender, but tied, in the public's mind, to a champion who might be mentally already somewhere else. He becomes the division's pressure point. Every time he wins, every time he knocks somebody out, he forces the UFC to make a choice. Do we keep stalling him with one more contender fight? Do we finally risk booking him for gold again if Pereira's still here? Or do we pull the trigger on a new era if the champ really does drift away? That's why what do you do with Jiří Procházka isn't just a cute title, it's an actual problem. Because whether Pereira stays, leaves, or floats between worlds, Jiri is still going to be there. Head shaved, hands low, walking forward into whoever they put in front of him. And sooner or later, the division has to decide whether he's just the lunatic guarding the door or the man you hand the keys to when the old king walks off into another kingdom. Here's the part nobody puts on the bout agreement. Jiří Procházka is a stress test for what kind of sport we actually want. Because if all we care about is perfect records and safe game plans, the sport trends toward minimal risk, maximum control. 5-round sparring matches with takedowns at the end of the round to secure cards. But fans keep proving something else with guys like Jiří, Tony, Gaethje, the Diaz brothers, Prime Lawler. We are absolutely willing to ride with people who lose. If they lose in a way that honors why we fell in love with this mess in the first place. When Jiří fights, there are no illusions. He might get knocked out. He might tap someone in a bizarre scramble. He might go to hell and come back for dessert. What he will not do is take the path of least resistance. That's not good for his long-term health. It's not good for his CTE risk profile. It's probably not good for his bank account compared to a safer, longer career. But it is brutally honest. He is telling you every time he fights, this is what I think this thing is supposed to be. You don't have to agree. You don't have to want a whole roster of Jiris. But the sport does feel more alive while he's in it. Because as the UFC gets bigger, the rules get safer, the brands get cleaner, and the language gets more corporate, a little piece of that old chaos gets pushed to the edges. Jiří is one of the few fighters still living on those edges and does it on purpose. All right, you made it this far. Your corner stool is waiting. No trolling, no drunk topology screenshots. Real answers only. Question 1. If Jiří takes out one more top contender, Ankalaev, Ulberg, whoever they throw at him, do you think he deserves a third shot at Alex Pereira? Not, would it be fun? We both know it would. I mean, deserves. Does the way he keeps forcing his way back into the picture outweigh that 0-2? Or is there a point where you say, no, man, that story is closed? Question 2. If Pereira walks away from 205 for good, full-time heavyweight superhero mode, do you want Jiří to be champion again? Or do you actually like him more as the division's unhinged mid-boss who just keeps testing everybody else's soul? Question 3. You're the matchmaker. You get one fight to book next for Jiří. Who is it and why? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm going to feature some of the sharpest ones in the next upload, especially if you actually break down the styles instead of just typing "War Jiří" in all caps and smashing send. Though, to be honest, I'm cool with that too. You do you, man. In a world where the sport keeps sanding down its edges, safer rules, bigger sponsors, fighters trained to talk like brand puppets, it's weirdly comforting to know there's still one man walking into a cage like it's an actual cage fight. Jiří Procházka is not the safest fighter. He's not the cleanest technician. He might never end up as the most decorated champion on the page. But every time that music hits and he starts that strange bounce on the way to the octagon, you feel something you don't feel with a lot of other names. Anything could happen, and he's okay with that. What do you do with a madman like that? If you're smart, you appreciate him while he's still here. I'm Reggie Cross for Behind the Lines, where we go further into the fight you didn't know you were watching. If you're feeling the vibe, hit that subscribe and remember, hype fades, legacy don't. Peace. 745